Everybody, thanks for watching and welcome to Greek Mythology Volume 3. So the last couple of volumes we got into just really getting into Greek mythology and, where it stems from. So a lot of people by now should understand that Greek mythology as we know it basically is giving us astrology. It's giving us the planets. It's giving us everything that's dealing with the mind, body, and spirit. Greek mythology, all these characters are characters that represent these things. Mainly, of course, the planets, the astrology, and what have you. We know the moons of Saturn, just about all of them is named after Greek gods. Many of the planets after Greek and Roman gods. So we understand that you had Greek mythology, which later we have Roman mythology, which is all basically piggybacking off Egyptian mythology. So when you get into all that, as we talked about, this is all astrology and really breaking that down and understanding, which we're going to really get into deeply in this video because it's something huge that people is missing when you think about the concept of this Greek mythology and why these stories exist. So we look at these characters and we have all been, taught at some point in our life about the Greek mythology and these Greek characters. And you got to wonder, why did they pound this stuff home, throughout school about Greek mythology and these Greek characters? People don't understand DC. DC Comics is based off of Greek mythology. If you watch the Wonder Woman movie, it was talking about Greek mythological things, dealing with Hades and dealing with Ares and dealing with, Zeus, and all this stuff is Greek mythology that we're still seeing today. So it's been pounded into us, and a lot of people don't really get the esoteric understanding. So we know when you look at the astrologers, we look at math, science, astrology, biology even, and everything that's dealing with, intelligent learning that we learn from school on up. It always goes back to Greek people. It goes back to Aristotle and Thales and Pythagoras and so on. But we know that these guys went to the Egyptian mystery schools. They studied in Kemet, which they spoke about themselves. So Kemet and the Egyptians are not given credit for teaching this knowledge and putting this knowledge out. Automatically, this stuff goes back to Greek. And it's one of the things you got to pay attention to with the English language, dealing with Greek and Roman, Latin. So when you go and look at the grammatic, they says it was going back to grammatic. People automatically associate that with Germany, which still stems from out of the language stems from out of Greek and Roman mythology, or Greek and Rome languages. So when you start doing the etymology and looking back, you'll understand that it's a Greco-Roman collaboration that really gave us the grammatic language in English, which is why you look at Greek letters, you see English letters like A. Talked about this in That's Game, Bible Christianity Finally Explained. So all of this, bringing us back to Greek, which we know is going to bring us back to Kemet. So understanding this, we understand that what we know today as far as our learning process, we getting from the Greeks, who basically lied and covered up everything. So now, if you do real research, everybody who has went on to study this whole thing and getting into the whole thing with the creation of the Bible. Now, if you're arguing biblical doctrine or biblical religion, especially with Hebrew Israelites, this is what you're getting into when you get into the scholarship of it. So for those of you who have looked, what did you find? You find, because you're trying to prove the authenticity of the Bible, which we cannot, because we're never going to have the originals or be able to prove that they even existed. So what we can prove is, one, if we can find proof that the Jews actually existed during a certain time prior, let's just say 4th century BCE, that they had a legacy and people talked about them, it gives more validity to the Bible itself. So what you had when you start to look, what did you find? You find a bunch of scholars who were trying to prove the existence of Jews. So understand, as I tell the Hebrews, when Kemet fell, part of the Egyptian empire was Israel. It stretched all the way over to Israel. So they came into Israel, they conquered Israel, which was full of African people, Egyptians, black people. talked about Tunis. I talked about, Tyre or Tyrus. We know it was Africans there. All this was conquered, right? So when they conquered these lands and they started to implement Hellenization, which Hellenization is basically the spreading of this, what we call the Jewish doctrine. So they took these Africans and made them Jews, Hebrews. So when you look, you find these philosophers and researchers, Greeks, trying to prove this existence, right? So that's what you find. There's quite a few expensive books on this whole thing. And it says, Plato, in the creation of the Hebrew Bible, for the first time compares the ancient law collections of the ancient Near East, the Greeks, and the Pentateuch to determine the legal antecedents, which basically means the precursor, for the biblical laws. Following on from his 2006 work, Berosus and Genesis, Benito and Exodus, Merkin takes up his theory that the Pentateuch was written around 270 BCE using Greek sources found at the Library of Alexandria, and applies this to an examination of biblical law codes. A striking number of legal parallels are found between the Pentateuch and Athenian laws, and specifically with those found in Plato's law of circa 350 BCE. Constitutional features in biblical law, Athenian law, and Plato's laws also contain close correspondences. Several genres of biblical law, including the Decalogue, are shown to have striking parallels with Greek legal collections, and the synthesis of narrative and legal context is shown to be compatible with Greek literature. All this evidence points to direct influence from Greek writings, especially Plato's law, on the biblical legal tradition. Finally, it is argued that the creation of the Hebrew Bible took place according to the program found in Plato's laws for creating a legally authorized national ethical literature, reinforcing the importance of this specific Greek text to the authors of the Torah and Hebrew Bible in the early Hellenistic era. This study offers a fascinating analysis of the background of the Pentateuch and will be of interest not only to biblical scholars but also to students of Plato, ancient law, and Hellenistic literary traditions. Now here's basically the review of what one of these researchers wrote about Reed and Merkin's findings. And this is basically what they said to sum it up. It says, the thesis is therefore clear. The Pentateuch is a Greek work inspired by Greek sources. Understand, the Pentateuch is a Greek work inspired by Greek sources. To just piss some Hebrew off if they're watching it. The book is constructed in 6 chapters each, followed by bibliographs relating to that chapter. An index of sources and an index of authors closes the volume. It says, thus, the thesis that the author pursues in this sequel of the first volume is that the Pentateuch in its legal parts is inspired by Platonic sources to which the 70, if you understand the letters of Orestes, the 70 Jews, had access in the great library of Alexandria. The argument is simple and comparative. The greater number of Pentateuchal laws, even if they had some Semitic precursors, seem copied from the Athenian law, or more precisely, the Platonic laws. Beyond this argument, the author proposes that the laws of Plato constitute a new hermeneutical, which basically means interpretation, a new hermeneutical key for the ideology not only of the Pentateuch, but the whole of the Bible. The Bible is the official national literature mandated according to the same instructions of the Platonic laws. If you understand that, that is big. So understand, Merkin, he was real careful in his book to not, say it flat out. He said what he said, and he let the information speak for itself. And if you got enough knowledge, you came to the right conclusions. But you had later scholars come out and say, what he meant. They reviewed the book. And the implications are, well, if this is all true, which it looks then the Greeks created Christianity, which I've been saying, they created Judaism. It's all bullshit. Now, American doesn't really come straight out and say it, try to make it as if, these people actually exist, because I doubt he want to really get in, on the bad side of Jews who running everything. But it's as if these people existed, and then you could somehow say, well, the Greeks didn't want to put out the truth. So they basically distorted. Like, they want to say that the Hebrews existed, but the Greeks didn't want to put out the truth, so they kind of distorted the information from the Hebrews about, what they actually said, which don't make sense, because if you didn't like it, you wouldn't have put out nothing. You wouldn't even did the information, you would have put out your own stuff. So the story of getting these 72 Hebrew elders to put out this information doesn't make sense. Now, in understanding that you're going to do what they did with this whole creation, they could have done that, which it looks like they did. Go get 70 so-called Hebrews and get them to do this so-called translation just to have a record of it. Now, whoever came up with this whole Black Hebrew Israelite doctrine understands all this. They know, which is why, they don't really want to jump on this. They wouldn't dare read any of those books because they understand the implications. Now, the whole thing is, they understand that when you go back and do the research, it all points to white Greeks. But when you leave that little door open saying possibly, because that's what they're piggybacking on. Now, this is the reason why King James must be black, as I said. Because if King James is black, then you can say, well, God gave King James the true translation, the real translation. Don't read what these Greeks talk about. Read the King James version, the real translation. Or they'll say, the Masoretic text, because it's in Hebrew. Stuff like this. But what they don't say and what they don't address is, how come your God gave the knowledge to the white man before his chosen people? Think about that. Clearly the Greeks had this information first. So why is it that God gave it to them before his chosen people? Why would he give it to them? Who would change his image and change everything about the book and make all these so-called lies and so on and so forth. But you expect us to take the same stuff that was supposedly created, in deception and believe you on it with no proof. So now understand this, and this is what these Hebrews are not getting. If you don't do the research, you're not going to know this. And this is painstaking research. It is so much. You got to be crazy. You got to be obsessed, which, I am, and I really was back then when I was digging into all this. You got to be, because there's so much, you have to dig into. And if you learn it in truth, you'll figure it out. I'll lab on this later. You'll figure it out. So anybody that's doing research on the Jews, the Hebrews, 4th century BCE, if you're looking for anything, on the Jews prior to 4th century BCE, there's only 4 sources that you can really go to. 4. And of those 4 sources, only one has real tangible, evidence that you can really believe. And he's the only one that everybody really goes to. So this is how you can break this stuff down. This is how you know who's who and who's doing the research. Because anything anybody said besides these 4 people is pseudo. It's bullshit. It's iffy. So these 4 people are the suspect one. I start with him first. Josephus, right? Josephus. Then you have Aristobulus. Then you have Diodorus Siculus, who this is largely about, what Merkabah wrote it. And then you have Hecataeus. Hecataeus and Diodorus is basically the primary people that he's sourcing for this book that Merkabah wrote, because that's who you have to source. If you arguing with somebody about this and they're not citing, which the Hebrews will not, they won't, and you're going to find out why in a second. If they're not citing Hecataeus and Diodorus Siculus, forget it, because it's pseudo. It's pseudo. We're gonna get into this in a second, but understand that. So you have Hecataeus, who is a large part of this book. He was 25 years old when Kemet fell. So he had 25 years of seeing Kemet being ruled by Egyptians. 25 years of that. And I believe he died in 550 BC. So he had 25 years, or that's when Kemet fell, was 550. So he knew, he had knowledge. Hecataeus understood what was going on. He's a historian. Look him up, he's a Greek historian. And he has two very important works that everybody knows about when you start researching this guy, Hecataeus. So you have Yanela Yer, which Yanela Yer basically means genealogy. Yanela Yer, Greek, means genealogy, right? So Yanela Yer, genealogy, and Storia. So Storia is basically your history. So Storia, Greek, history, that's where we get story, Storia. Yanela Yer, genealogy. That's his book. That's what it translates into. The most important book is his one that's basically on his journey. The journey that he fucking took, supposedly, around the world, which is pronounced Periostos Gamma Sigma. Periostos Gamma Sigma. I gotta say it a couple times to get it out. But it basically means journey around the world. So you have these important books by Hecataeus. And he's known for these books because he supposedly traveled and did this research on these civilizations of people, which is why he must be cited. Now, there are only about 300 or so fragments of these books in existence. And you have Theodorus, who is known for being, a person that had this library of books, of rare books. And supposedly he had probably a more fulfilled book or manuscript of Hecataeus' words. So it was fragments, but probably more complete than what we have today. Now understand, Diodorus Siculus was born, about 400 years after Hecataeus. So we're talking about hundreds of years later that he's referencing Hecataeus and his works, Diodorus, right? So that's one of the important things to understand. When people are going to reference, they're going to Diodorus, who is referencing Hecataeus, who is important, because if you're going to say what somebody said, we need to know who this guy is and what he said exactly. And the thing with Diodorus and his writings, because Diodorus is paraphrasing Hecataeus. He's paraphrasing him because he's not going directly from manuscript, copying what he said specifically. He's paraphrasing from the fragments that he had. Now, as scholars, you have the fragments that all scholars agree upon, that Diodorus cites. These are the fragments that everybody say, these ones is okay, they're authentic, we believe these are real. And you have the fragments that they don't have, that is questionable. And for many reasons, which we'll get into some of them, because they don't know, just like Diodorus, he speculates a little bit, but he's paraphrasing what's said. So now the whole thing is, of course, you have Hecataeus, who was born, around the time the Egyptians was ruling. And here's a guy who lived through the rulership of the Egyptians and lived through the conquest of the Persians. Now, if this dude was an historian and he traveled the world, as it says with his books, he's supposed to have traveled the world and everything like that, and did a genealogy and all this, at some point he had to speak to Jews. There's no way he could not have spoken to Jews or Hebrews. He had to have, and he had to have mentioned them. Now, according to Diodorus, he never mentions them. He never says that he spoke to any Jews. In fact, he says that what he heard about the Jews came from the Egyptians, which makes it even more suspect that how could you not have spoken to any Jews? And it says here, let's read. The undisputed fragments of Hecataeus in Diodorus Siculus' library, Book 1, display no awareness of the Pentateuch, while the account of the Jews in the Book 40 is so divergent from the Pentateuch as to guarantee that Hecataeus did not have access to Jewish writings, translated or otherwise. These difficulties are usually overcome by postulating that Hecataeus learned about the Pentateuch from Jewish priests living in Alexandria. But a second difficulty is that in Diodorus Siculus' library, Book 1, Hecataeus repeatedly named Egyptian priests as his sources. Nowhere did he claim to have had contact with Jews. If Hecataeus had contact with Jewish priests or had access to Jewish writings, he would have doubtless have said so to enhance the authority of his account. But Hecataeus made no such claims in undisputed fragments. Third, the detailed information Hecataeus allegedly presented about the Jews in Book 40 was not quoted or utilized by any author from 320 BCE to the time of Posidonius and Diodorus Siculus in the 1st century BCE. That Theophrastus read Hecataeus is certain. Yet, the description of Herodox Jews and Theophrastus on piety markedly differed from the detailed knowledge of Orthodox Judaism in the allegedly Hecataean passage in Book 40. Manetho's dependence on Hecataeus of Abdera is certain, yet his knowledge of the Jews was limited to their location in Jerusalem. That's all they know about them, where they came from. They didn't really know much. 2nd century BCE Alexandrian Jewish writers such as Aristobulus and Pseudo-Aristeas, which the letters of Aristeas is pseudo, and they had already came to the conclusion that Jews wrote this later on. Their extensive research in the classics, including Hecataeus of Abdera, Aegyptica, but failed to discover a single passage in which an early Hellenistic author of Hecataeus' time or earlier quoted Jewish scripture. That so many writers on the Jews who were familiar with Hecataeus knew nothing of the context of Diodorus Siculus' library suggests that the latter passage did not derive from Hecataeus. Meaning it's all bullshit. And you have to understand, this is the foundation evidence of proving the validity of the Bible. This is what you have to go to. The whole thing about the letters of Aristeas, all this stuff, it's all suspect, it's all pseudo. The only real tangible proof is what we have from Diodorus on Hecataeus' supposed writing of, what took place. That he doesn't say he met any Jews or anything like that. So I get Hebrew after Hebrew quoting, Josephus. As if Josephus was this major knowledgeable source who had, real good provable information, where he was always quoting from Aristobulus, which Aristobulus' information was pseudo. And it's even saying here in the sightings. It says down here, Josephus, in conducting a similar search on ancient writings for reference to the Jews, had to resort to the Jewish forgery Pseudo-Hecataeus. And this is on the page. It says Aristobulus writing circa 150 BCE will likely have cited the source behind Diodorus Siculus' library, which he didn't, if it existed at the time. And Josephus is citing Aristobulus, and basically we know Aristobulus stuff is Pseudo-Hecataeus. Because if it's not, then he would have would have stated what Diodorus had, which he does not, or something better, since he lived, before him. But we don't get that. We don't get none of that information. So, bunch of stuff to look at. Now let's continue down here. It says, thus, despite the doubt attached to many quasi-historical details in Aristobulus' works, it still appears likely that he was correct in such basic details as the Septuagint originating under Ptolemy II Philadelphus, who I always talk about, and the involvement of 70 scholars associated with the Judean Perusia in executing this project. We may therefore date the Septuagint with reasonably high confidence to the period of 273 to 269 BCE under Ptolemy II Philadelphus, who was a white Greek. Since the Septuagint provides the first objective external evidence for the composition of the Pentateuch, the date of the Septuagint translation becomes a terminus ab quem for the books of Moses, which that's Latin. That basically means this is the only time that you could date this around this time. That's basically what it means. It's the limit, or the only time you could date something. There exists no external evidence that the Pentateuch was written earlier than this time. Boom. Than this time of Ptolemy II Philadelphus. A proposed date of composition for the Pentateuch anytime prior to 269 BCE is permitted by current evidence and must be seriously considered. Significantly, although external evidence for the Pentateuch is lacking prior to the Septuagint translation of 273 to 269 BCE, the Septuagint set off an explosion of derivative Jewish writing in the 3rd century BCE, both in Syria and in Egypt. The following is a list of the earliest known Jewish writings with approximate dates of composition. None of it predates the Septuagint Greek or the 4th century BCE. And as I said, if the stuff is legit, we should find stuff. Historians, people around that time should have been talking about, there's no way in the world you can have what happens in the Old Testament not written about as much, and then have stuff that is like so meaningless, like just talking about the gravestones of the Greeks. So elaborate, same thing with the Egyptians. And if they do all this stuff depicting what happened in these people's life that we can find, no way all of this stuff goes down and then we find nothing on the Hebrews. And again, as I pointed out, Herodotus, Greek historian, says nothing about the Jews. One of the things he cited says, neither Herodotus nor Hecataeus of Abdera claimed to have consulted the Jews. Rather, the Egyptians were regularly cited as authorities throughout Diodorus Book 1, thought to have drawn heavily on Hecataeus of Abdera. Hecataeus of Abdera appears to have drawn exclusively on Egyptian oral sources supplemented by Herodotus. Never talked to any Jews because they didn't exist. It says here, Hieronymus of Cardia, the historian of the Wars of the Diadochi, 323, when Alexander died, to 278 BCE, fought under Antigonus Monothalamus in Palestine in 312 BCE and was assigned to supervise the collection of Ausfat or asphalt from the Dead Sea. He never mentioned the Jews. I'll leave it at that. And it says down here, the earliest Greek writers who mention the Jews thus provide no external evidence of new developments in the evolution of the Torah. At the time of the Elephantine Papyri, 494 to 400 BCE, we have authoritative Jewish priestly regulations, but no evidence that these have been committed to writing. The Elephantine Papyri also testified to toleration of practices contrary to the Pentateuch. As late as 315 BCE, Theophrastus described contemporary sacrificial practices among the Jews that the Hebrew Bible condemns as heterodox. The first mention of Moses as Jewish founder and lawgiver occurred in Hecataeus' A Aegyptica in 320 to 315 BCE. Manetho also mentioned Moses probably not long thereafter. Neither author attributed writings to Moses, although both appear to have viewed him as the lawgiver of the Jews. Other than the disputed fragment of Hecataeus in Diodorus Siculus Library 40.3, the Septuagint translation is the first definite evidence of Jewish writings. So it's clear as day what's going on here. The stuff that they was writing about contradicts the Hebrews, their supposed doctrine. And they're reading this stuff and it's like, no way this could be Hebrews if this stuff is real, because they're doing stuff contrary. And then to really dig deeper into this, you got to understand that these are Greeks. Plain and simple. These are people who are, even if they're black, they're people who was basically grew up in Greek understanding of things. This is later after the conquest of Egypt. Egypt is over 100 years gone now and conquered around this time. So we're talking about a couple 100 years later, so they are basically being indoctrinated into this Hellenization and the rituals. So contrary to what was written about, what must have happened is they came up with the story. They came up with who these Jews are supposed to be. And they got priests, they got people to go out and spread this story so it reached the ears of historians and people who was documenting the times. So all these historians you have, when you start to look and research this, they're gathering around, they're trying to figure out, okay, we know these people are Jews, these people are supposed to be these people, but they're saying this is what happened to them, this is who they are, and so on and so forth. Let's validate this. And then they're going out. Now, we don't even know, one, Hecataeus, and what he actually said. We don't even know, because everything seems to be in, fragments. We can't get no real information because it's in fragments. But they have the fragments to say, oh, this person existed because we have fragments. But there's still no way to know if he existed or if he actually wrote this stuff. But there's one huge thing going on here that a lot of people can't fathom and don't understand to even ask the question. You have the Egyptians putting out this mythology, the Greeks copying that, putting out this mythology, right? So the biggest thing for me that drove me crazy for months in really studying all this, the biggest thing that drove me crazy was, why? For what? What is the point of this? And you have to understand what I mean by this is there's so much going on around this time. There's so much that needed to be learned, by the people. So you have all of these civilizations even up till now. You have, Egyptians having this knowledge, the Greeks having this knowledge. You have later on, you have priests, preachers, governments, all these people claiming to be good. Secret societies and all these people claiming to be good, claiming to want the best interests of the people. I'm here to help you. I'm here to establish, this order so I can help you. Everything is supposed to be to help the people, but none of them are helping the people. And it's like, okay, you're trying to help me, but then I walk into this society, everything is coded. Why is everything coded? So you're trying to help me, you're supposed to help me. I come to learn, but you're teaching me in codes, right? Secret society. Then time passes, we get religion. But we open the Bible, what the hell is all this? You're trying to save my soul. This is the most important book in teaching in the history of mankind, and this is how it's written. This is how you teach it to us, and then our teachers don't follow the book itself. What is this all about? What is the joke here? What's going on? So you have this, and let's take it back. You have the Greeks going to the mystery schools. They beg and plead to get into mystery schools. They finally get in there, right? And remember, the Greeks are always trying to rationalize, because they couldn't deal with spirituality. But they get into the mystery schools, right, finally. And then the Greeks are thinking, this is our shot. This is our chance. They get into the mystery schools and they come out and do what? Man, know thyself. They follow exactly what the Egyptians are doing. Man, know thyself. Now, many researchers will tell you that, well, the Greeks most likely helped to conquer Kemet because they probably felt like the Egyptians was bullshitting them. The Egyptians is not giving them all the information and knowledge. So they say, okay, we're going to get in there and conquer the place and take over because they're hiding something that must be amazing from us. What is with all this secrecy, all this esoteric jargon? I'm coming to the school to learn. This is important. Stop playing with me. Teach me what I need to know. This is supposed to be the most important information of all time. Teach it to me. And you go in there and it's esoteric and you can't fathom what's going on. The other Greeks are coming out not saying much. They're saying, man, know themselves. They sound like the Egyptians. So Kemet is conquered, right? Kemet falls. The Greeks get in there. They get the information. They leave the gold. They leave shit intact. They leave so much wealth in Egypt. They got what they got and they ran out of there and they left, right? Little time passes. The Greeks start to build their civilizations even bigger. And what do? Exactly what the Egyptians do. Mystery schools. Hiding esoteric information in buildings. Secret societies. You have these philosophers coming out and start doing exactly what the Egyptians did, teaching esoterically, right? And it's like, wow, it gets worse. Not only are they doing what the Egyptians did, but they start teaching this esoteric talk, but then they get in there, they get the knowledge, then it's like, oh, well, forget everything that we made. Forget Zeus. Forget Greek mythology. Forget all the stuff that we was talking about with the Elysian fields. Forget all of that stuff. we're going to create these new gods, this new concept, which they forgot about, Greek mythology. And what did they do? They switched it up and they gave us, the biblical stuff. So as I said, and I always point out, okay, well, we're going to take this concept of Pandora's box and give you Eve and the apple. We're going to take Deucalion the Pharaoh and give you Noah's Ark and the flood story. Samson, Hercules. This whole thing, Hercules, Samson, they're going to give you, they took old Greek stuff that was theirs, switched it up. Now, many people will look at it to say, well, of course, to deceive people because, the Egyptians would know these stories from the Greeks. But that's not the point. The point is why, right? Keep this concept in your head of why. Why? So they do this and they switch the stories over to give us the Bible with all this esoteric Greek mythology, Egyptian stuff in it, right? Then, as I said, it gets worse. You have this happen. You have later the Romans come in. Because remember, the Romans, they did the same thing. They went in there to the mystery schools. They went to Kemet to learn to get the knowledge. They went back home and did what? Exactly what the Greeks did. Roman mythology. Started making these stories, right? They conquer a massive empire, an incredibly powerful empire that can topple anything, right? And what do? They go and follow the same path. Now, before Rome, while the rise of Rome is happening, what do the Greeks do? The Greeks, they come out, as I said, teaching this information, and then they start massacring each other. Not just over land and power, but over how it was going to be distributed and how they were going to go forward as far as growing their civilization. Because clearly, people was like, we killed our allies, people who taught us so much stuff. We lost so many men and soldiers. We spent years, decades, perfecting this master plan to finally defeat the Egyptians. And we do that just to copy off of their shit that they done? Just to come up with stories and tell stories? Remember, you had Hellenization. They spread, we did all this to spread a story, a mythology that we made up. We killed all these people, took all these lands and golds to spread a story. That's the legacy, to spread a story, to tell people tales and story. What is the point? So you had the wars of the Diadochi, which only ended because one, the Africans started building kingdoms, rebuilding kingdoms, and two, Rome was growing in power. And as I said, Rome grew in power, right? Rome goes in, conquers the Egyptian. So much war going on. So powerful Rome was to conquer all this land that they conquered. And then they finally beat their rival. They beat the Greeks. And what do? Continue Hellenization. They beat them. And it's like, okay, we beat y'all. But look at how Rome was structured. The Caesars, the glory of Rome, and the direction it was going. They beat the Greeks. And they copied the Greeks. And they continue Hellenization. Why is that? So you gotta start looking now and like, what is this? Okay, boom, y'all written the Pentateuch, the Old Testament. Okay, we're gonna copy that. We need a New Testament. Think about what I'm saying. You had Egyptian mythology, Greek mythology, these stories. Fast forward, they created the Bible. Then you have the New Testament. Different kingdoms, but following this concept. So Rome comes into power. Rome copies what the Greeks does, and then they do exactly what the Greeks did. It's a civil war. The Wars of the Diadochi was basically a civil war. Then the Romans do the same thing after they conquer the Greeks. There's a civil war in Rome. Everybody's fighting because they don't understand what are we doing here. Years, centuries of war to write a book with stories in it. This is what we're doing to spread this book knowledge. We did all of this not for gold and glory, but to spread a story. What is this? So you had civil war in Rome, and then you had the creation of the papacy after that civil war, to which you remember all the papal laws, and everybody said this is it. Everything, they put all their eggs in this whole Christianity, bag, and they basically said, this is our basket. We ride with Christianity from here on out, and it's still to this day Roman Christianity, right? Then you have the Crusades. They basically go out and wipe out any opposition that could possibly rise up against the papacy, and anybody that can come into, any type of, who can cause any harm to Rome and the papacy. Carve these people up. You have the Crusaders go out there and kill all these people. The Knights Templar are going to kill all these people, and all these people with knowledge was wiped out. So you go and look, Greece. The population is 90%, Orthodox Christian. You look, England, Germany, Russia, all of the European countries are what? Christian. So they built their empires based off of Christianity, right? Built it based off Christianity. Then you have Rome built its empires. They had the Crusades. They wipe all these people out. We come into the time of King James, and then you have these kings in England. Same thing. Get with Rome. We need a Bible. Okay, we need another Bible. Okay, we need another Bible. We need a bishop's Bible. We need a great Bible. We need all these Bibles to do what? Tell a story. To run our kingdom off a story. And of course, you will look at it and say, well, no, they're just telling the story because the story was supposed to captivate people. There are other ways of doing this that don't involve the story. So the question is this. The people of that time, how could they put their faith? Everything is based on Christianity. Everything was based on these stories. The whole morality of all these people are based on these stories, and the people allow this to happen. So again, you follow it all the way back. Rome. Everything that was done before they conquered the Greeks, which you have the Caesars and everything going on. Before they conquered the Greeks. Remember, you got the Caesars going on, they got their gods, they're establishing themselves as gods. Their civilization is going a complete different path, right? Same thing with the Greeks before they conquered the Egyptians. Civilization is going a complete different path, even though they're copying the Egyptians. Remember, they didn't have these concepts until later on. But then once they get the knowledge from the Egyptians, everything changes. Same thing with Rome. As soon as they get the knowledge from the Greeks, which they got from the Egyptians, everything changes. So the question is, what is it about these stories? Think about it. These mythologies that is so fucking important. Do you understand what I'm saying? What is it about these stories, even still to this day? We got the Bible. We got these stories. That's the foundation of everything that we're doing. What is it about these stories, these mythologies that the Greeks found so important, the Egyptians found so important that they wrote about it, and that the Romans looked at this stuff and said, this is the way to go. The Greeks said, this is the way we're supposed to go. And again, it all gets into universal law. It's just that simple. So go back and look and see that throughout this whole pairing we can see between the Greeks and the ancient Egyptians, they were still following these concepts that are basically stories about who we really are. Understanding that, I understand the story is going to tell us some truth, but it's just a story. Why not just tell us straight out what's going on and what the hell is out there? All these fucking stories. Like, tell me the truth. Yeah, it's frustrating, and that's what the Greeks felt back then because they didn't know. They were frustrated by it. And then they did the unthinkable, and they fucking killed the people that can save their pawns. Massacred them. And they got the knowledge to only figure out what? To only find out what? Exactly what they was telling them. And they had to continue that concept. Think about it. Think about how stupid the Bible is when you read it. Oh, really? You got a woman from a man's rib. Really? Oh, talking snake, talking donkeys, right? Okay, so this man walked on water. Sure. Think about the stupidity of it. How absurd it sounds. But people believe it. They gave their life for it. They're willing to die for these stories. Think about that. You have to think about how they could have easily came up with a better story that's more believable for the people if this is so important. More believable. If it was just about, for those of you who are going to say, no, they did this just to trick the people. Or if you're trying to trick people, there's smarter ways of doing it than to come up with these stupid stories. I can tell you a bunch of whoppers to try to get money out your pocket. And they sound as stupid as these stories in the Bible. I'm not getting no money from you. They could have came up with better stories. These are esoteric stories and they're told this way for a reason. Understand? So that's telling you that there's a reason behind the esoteric parables in the Bible and why they're told that way. There's a reason behind all of this and why this is all esoteric. And as I said before in the beginning, I can't just tell you because you have to make the choice.